The snow had begun falling 3 days ago and showed no sign of stopping when Harrison Yates spotted the dark figure collapsed near his fence line, half buried in white drifts that sparkled under the pale February sun of 1878. He had been checking his cattle in the north pasture of his ranch outside Palisade, Colorado, making sure none had wandered off or gotten trapped in the unexpected blizzard that had swept down from the Rockies. The winter had been particularly brutal this year, and Harrison had lost 2 head already to the cold. He could not afford to lose more. At 26 years old, he had been working this land for 5 years since his father passed, building it up from a modest homestead into a respectable cattle operation. The work was hard and lonely, but it was his. When he first saw the shape in the snow, Harrison thought it might be a deer or perhaps one of his calves. But as he urged his horse closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a person, small and still, wearing buckskin clothing now stiff with ice. He dismounted quickly, his boots sinking deep into the snow, and rushed to kneel beside the figure. It was a young woman, her lips blue with cold, her dark hair frozen in strands across her face. She was Apache, he could tell from her clothing and the beadwork on her dress. Her breathing was shallow, barely visible in the frigid air. Harrison did not hesitate. Whatever tensions existed between the settlers and the Apache people in these parts, he could not leave another human being to freeze to death in the snow. He gathered her carefully into his arms, surprised at how light she was, how fragile she felt against his chest. Her skin was like ice through his thick coat. Harrison called to his horse, which came obediently, and with some difficulty, he managed to mount while holding the unconscious woman. He turned toward home, urging his horse into as quick a pace as the deep snow would allow. The ride back to his ranch house took nearly an hour, each minute feeling like an eternity as Harrison felt the cold seeping through his own clothes. He kept checking to make sure the woman was still breathing, relieved each time he saw the faint fog of her breath in the frigid air. Who was she? How had she come to be alone in the snow? These questions would have to wait. Right now, survival was all that mattered. His ranch house was a solid structure of timber and stone, built by his father with thick walls to withstand the harsh Colorado winters. Smoke rose from the chimney where he had left the fire burning that morning. Harrison dismounted awkwardly, still holding the woman, and kicked open the front door. The warmth inside hit him like a wave, and he quickly carried her to the large bed in the corner of the main room. He knew from experience that warming someone too quickly could be dangerous. His father had taught him that years ago when they had found a prospector nearly frozen to death. Harrison removed the woman's wet moccasins and the frozen outer layer of her buckskin dress, then wrapped her in thick wool blankets. He stoked the fire higher and heated water in his kettle, preparing warm broth from the venison stew he had made the day before. As he worked, Harrison studied her face. She was young, probably around 20 or 21, with high cheekbones and delicate features. Even in her current state, there was a striking beauty to her. He found himself wondering about her story, about how she had ended up alone in a blizzard miles from any Apache settlement he knew of. Hours passed. Harrison sat in his chair by the fire, keeping watch. He tried to get small sips of warm broth into her mouth, encouraged when her throat would automatically swallow. Slowly, color began to return to her face. Her breathing deepened and became more regular. As evening approached and darkness fell outside, her eyelids finally fluttered open. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, confused, then her eyes found Harrison. They were dark and intelligent, filled with sudden fear. She tried to sit up quickly, but her weakened body would not cooperate. She said something in Apache, her voice hoarse and urgent. "Easy now," Harrison said gently, holding up his hands to show he meant no harm. "You are safe. I found you in the snow. You nearly froze to death." She looked at him with suspicion and confusion, clearly not understanding his words. Harrison moved slowly to the table and ladled more warm broth into a cup. He brought it to her carefully, gesturing that she should drink. She watched him warily but took the cup with shaking hands. The warm liquid seemed to help, and some of the fear left her eyes, replaced by exhaustion. Harrison pointed to himself. "Harrison," he said clearly. Then he pointed to her with a questioning look. She studied him for a long moment before answering. "Winona," she said softly, her voice rough from the cold. Her last name came next in Apache, but it sounded like Evening Star when she translated it for him, seeing his confusion. "Winona Etsity," she said, giving him the name white men could pronounce. "Winona," Harrison repeated, offering a small smile. "You are safe here. Rest now." She did not seem entirely convinced, but the exhaustion was too much. Her eyes closed again, and she drifted into a more natural sleep. Harrison returned to his chair, wondering what the morning would bring. He had heard stories of Apache warriors attacking settlers who interfered with their people, but he had also heard tales of honor and gratitude. He did not regret his choice to save her. He could not have lived with himself otherwise. That night, Harrison slept lightly in his chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap. It was not that he feared Winona herself, but he had no idea if anyone was looking for her or what circumstances had led to her being alone in the blizzard. The wind howled outside, and snow continued to pile against the windows. He woke just before dawn to find Winona watching him from the bed, her dark eyes alert and cautious. In the gray morning light, he could see her more clearly. She was indeed beautiful, with an inner strength that showed even in her weakened state. Her long dark hair had dried overnight and fell in waves over her shoulders. "How do you feel?" Harrison asked, though he was not sure how much English she understood. To his surprise, she answered in halting but clear English. "I live because of you." Her voice was still hoarse but stronger than the night before. Harrison felt relief wash over him. If they could communicate, perhaps he could help her return safely to her people. "What happened? How did you end up in the snow?" Winona's face darkened with memory. "I was traveling with my uncle to trade with the Ute. We were caught in storm. We were separated. I tried to find him but could not. I kept walking, hoping to find shelter. Then I remember nothing until I woke here." Harrison frowned. "Your uncle might still be out there. When the storm clears, I can help you search." She looked at him with surprise and something that might have been respect. "You would help, of course," Harrison said simply. Winona studied him for a long moment, as if trying to understand this white rancher who had saved her life and now offered to help find her uncle. In her experience, most white settlers wanted nothing to do with Apache people except to drive them from their lands. This man was different. The storm continued throughout the day, keeping them confined to the house. Harrison made breakfast, cooking eggs and bacon while Winona watched from the bed, still too weak to stand for long. He brought her food and more hot broth, pleased to see her eating with better appetite. As the day progressed, they spoke in careful, simple sentences. Harrison learned that Winona's tribe was camped about 30 miles to the south, that her father was a respected warrior, and that she had learned English from missionaries who had briefly visited her village years ago. Winona learned that Harrison lived alone, that he had no wife or family left, and that he worked his ranch with only the occasional help of a few hired hands when it was cattle season. She seemed puzzled by his solitary existence, coming from a culture where family and community were everything. "You are not lonely?" she asked, her English improving as she used it more. Harrison considered the question. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but the work keeps me busy, and I have my horses and cattle for company." He smiled slightly, though they are not great conversationalists. Winona's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile, the first he had seen from her. It transformed her face, making her seem younger and less guarded. That evening, as Harrison prepared dinner, Winona insisted on getting up from the bed. She was unsteady on her feet, but her strength was returning. She watched him cook with interest, and he found himself explaining what he was doing, teaching her the English words for various cooking implements and ingredients. Her intelligence was obvious in how quickly she picked up new vocabulary. They ate together at his small wooden table, and Harrison found himself enjoying the company more than he had expected. It had been over a year since he had shared a meal with anyone. Most of his interactions were brief exchanges in town when he went for supplies. He had not realized how much he missed simple human conversation. After dinner, Winona returned to the bed to rest while Harrison cleaned up. The wind outside had died down slightly, and the snow had thinned to scattered flurries. By morning, if the weather held, they might be able to search for her uncle. Harrison woke with the first light of dawn, his instincts honed by years of ranch life pulling him from sleep. He rose from his chair by the fire and stretched his stiff muscles, then moved quietly to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. His ranch was surrounded. In every direction, as far as he could see in the pale morning light, Apache warriors sat on horseback, silent and still as statues. Harrison's experienced eye counted them quickly. There had to be close to 200 braves, all armed, all watching his house. The sight was both terrifying and magnificent, a display of force and organization that took his breath away. He heard movement behind him and turned to find Winona standing, having wrapped a blanket around herself. She came to the window and looked out. Her eyes widened, and she said something in Apache that sounded like a prayer or an exclamation of surprise. "Friends of yours?" Harrison asked, trying to keep his voice calm despite the hammering of his heart. Winona shook her head, still staring out the window. "My father. My uncle must have found our camp and told them I was lost. They came looking." She turned to Harrison, and he saw worry in her eyes. "They do not know what happened. They will think you took me." Harrison felt the weight of the situation settle on his shoulders. Outside were 200 Apache warriors who probably thought he had kidnapped or harmed one of their own. He was one man, alone, with no way to defend himself against such numbers. His life now depended entirely on Winona's word and the willingness of her people to listen. "What should I do?" he asked her quietly. Winona straightened her shoulders, and Harrison saw the daughter of a warrior emerging. "I will go out. I will tell them the truth, that you saved my life." She looked at him with fierce determination. "I will not let them harm you." "Maybe we should go together," Harrison suggested. "No," Winona said firmly. "Let me go first. Alone. It is safer this way." Before Harrison could argue further, Winona walked to the door. She was still wearing his blanket over her buckskin dress, her feet in the extra pair of socks he had given her since her moccasins were still drying by the fire. She pulled open the door and stepped out into the cold morning air. Harrison watched from the window, his hand instinctively moving to his rifle, though he knew it would be useless against so many. He saw Winona walk forward, standing tall despite her recent ordeal. She called out in Apache, her voice clear and strong. From the line of warriors, one man urged his horse forward. He was older, perhaps in his 50s, with a weathered face and an aura of authority that marked him as a leader. He dismounted quickly and strode to Winona, speaking rapidly in Apache. Winona responded, gesturing toward the house, toward Harrison's window where he stood watching. The conversation continued for several minutes. Harrison saw the older man's expression change from anger to surprise to something that might have been relief. He embraced Winona, and Harrison realized this must be her father. Other warriors dismounted and approached, including a younger man who appeared to have an injured arm in a sling. That would be the uncle, Harrison guessed, who had survived the storm but been hurt in the process. Winona turned toward the house and gestured for Harrison to come out. His heart was pounding, but he trusted her. He had saved her life, and she had given her word to protect his. Harrison put down his rifle, pulled on his coat, and walked out into the cold morning. The 200 braves watched him in silence as he approached. Harrison kept his hands visible, his posture respectful but not submissive. He stopped a few feet from Winona and her father, waiting. Winona spoke in Apache, clearly telling the story of how Harrison had found her and saved her from freezing. She pointed to the house, presumably describing how he had cared for her. When she finished, her father looked at Harrison for a long moment. Then, to Harrison's surprise, the older man stepped forward and extended his hand in the white man's gesture of greeting. Harrison took it, feeling the strength in the warrior's grip. "I am Nial Etsidi," the man said in accented but clear English. "Father of Winona, you saved my daughter's life. This is a debt that cannot be repaid with simple words." "I did what anyone should do," Harrison replied. "I could not leave her to die in the snow." Nial's eyes studied him intently. "Many white men would have. You are not like them. What is your name, rancher?" "Harrison Yates, sir." Nial nodded slowly. "Harrison Yates, you have honored my family with your actions. The Apache people do not forget such things." He gestured to the warriors behind him. "We came in anger, thinking harm had come to my daughter. Instead, we find a man of honor. This changes things." Harrison felt the tension begin to drain from his shoulders, though he remained cautious. He was still very much outnumbered and on uncertain ground. Winona stepped closer to her father and spoke again in Apache. Harrison could not understand the words, but he saw her gesture to the house, to the surrounding land, to him. Her father listened carefully, then a slow smile crossed his weathered face. "My daughter says you live alone," Nial said to Harrison. "That you showed her kindness and asked nothing in return. She says you offered to help search for her uncle when the storm cleared." He paused. "She says you treated her with respect as you would treat anyone, not as an enemy or as something less than human." Harrison felt uncomfortable with the praise. It was just the right thing to do. "Perhaps," Nial agreed, "but doing the right thing is rarer than it should be, especially in these times." He looked back at his warriors, then at Harrison again. "There is tension between our peoples. The government pushes us to reservations. Settlers take land that has been ours for generations. There is anger and violence on both sides, but perhaps in small ways there can also be understanding. Perhaps there can be friendship." Harrison felt the weight of the moment. What happened here, what was said and done, could matter far beyond just himself and Winona. "I would welcome friendship," he said carefully. "I have no quarrel with the Apache people. I just want to work my land in peace." Nial nodded. "And we just want to live as we have always lived, to hunt and move with the seasons without being driven away or killed." His expression grew serious. "But the times are changing. The world is changing. We must adapt or die." Winona spoke up, addressing her father in Apache. Harrison watched the interaction, wishing he could understand. Whatever she was saying, her father listened intently, occasionally glancing at Harrison with an expression that was hard to read. Finally, Nial turned back to Harrison. "My daughter asks if she may stay here for a few more days, to fully recover her strength before the journey back to our camp. She says the ride would be hard on her in her current state." He paused, his eyes sharp and assessing. "I trust this would be acceptable to you." and I trust you would continue to treat her with the honor you have shown." Harrison felt his face warm despite the cold. "Of course. She is welcome to stay as long as she needs. I give you my word she will be safe and treated with respect." "Good," Niall said. "Then it is settled. I will leave some warriors nearby, not because I doubt your word, but because it is not proper for an unmarried woman to stay alone with a man, even in these circumstances. They will camp beyond your eastern pasture and will not interfere unless called for." Harrison understood. It was about honor and propriety, about protecting Winona's reputation within her own culture. "That is fair," he agreed. Niall embraced his daughter again, speaking quietly to her in Apache. Harrison saw affection and concern in the older man's face. Then Niall turned to his warriors and called out in their language. The effect was immediate. The 200 braves began to disperse, some riding off toward the eastern pasture Niall had mentioned, others heading back south presumably toward the main camp. Within minutes, only a small group remained, about 20 warriors who positioned themselves at a respectful distance. Niall mounted his horse, then looked down at Harrison one more time. "You have my gratitude, Harrison Yates. When my daughter is ready to return, send word with the warriors who remain. They will escort her safely home." He paused. "And you would be welcome to visit our camp if you wish. It is good to know there are still men of honor in this territory." With that, Niall rode off, followed by most of his warriors. Harrison and Winona stood in the snow watching them go. When the last of the main group had disappeared into the distance, Winona turned to Harrison. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for speaking well to my father, for agreeing to let me stay." Harrison met her eyes and felt something stir in his chest, something he had not felt in a very long time. "You are welcome here, Winona, for as long as you need." They returned to the house, and Harrison realized that his life had just become considerably more complicated. He now had Apache warriors watching his ranch, and the daughter of one of their leaders staying in his home. But more than that, he had Winona herself, whose presence was affecting him in ways he had not anticipated. Over the next few days, a rhythm developed between them. Harrison went about his daily ranch chores, checking on his cattle, repairing fence line damaged by the storm, chopping wood for the fire. Winona helped where she could, her strength returning quickly. She proved to be surprisingly capable, learning his routines and anticipating what needed to be done. She could not do the heavy work yet, but she took over the cooking and other household tasks, bringing an order and warmth to the house that Harrison had not realized was missing. They talked as they worked, sharing stories of their lives. Harrison told her about his childhood, about learning ranching from his father, about the hard years after his parents died when he had almost lost the property. Winona told him about growing up in the Apache camps, about learning to ride and shoot, about the traditional stories of her people and the changes that were threatening their way of life. Harrison found himself looking forward to their conversations, to the sound of her voice and her quick laugh when he said something amusing. She was teaching him words in Apache, and he was helping her expand her English vocabulary. There was an ease between them that felt natural, as if they had known each other far longer than just a few days. On the fourth morning, Harrison was surprised to see one of the Apache guards approaching the house. The young warrior spoke limited English, but he managed to communicate that he had a message from Niall. Harrison invited him in, offering coffee, which the warrior accepted with a nod of thanks. Winona translated the longer message. "My father invites you to our camp," she said, her eyes bright. "He wishes to honor you properly for saving my life. There will be a feast tomorrow evening." She paused. "He says it would mean much if you would come." Harrison felt uncertain. He had never been to an Apache camp, never spent time among their people except in brief, tense encounters in town. But he saw the hope in Winona's face and knew this was important. "Tell your father I would be honored to attend." Winona smiled, and Harrison felt his heart skip a beat. That smile was dangerous, he realized. He was beginning to care for this woman far more than was wise, given their different worlds. The next day passed in a flurry of preparation. Winona insisted that Harrison needed to look presentable for the feast, and she set about mending a tear in his best shirt and brushing the dust from his good coat. Harrison felt ridiculous at the fuss, but appreciated her care. He also selected one of his better horses for the journey, a steady mare that would not be easily spooked. As the sun began to set, Harrison and Winona rode out together, escorted by the Apache guards. The camp was about 2 hours away, nestled in a valley that offered some protection from the wind. As they approached, Harrison could see dozens of hide lodges arranged in a circle, fires burning throughout the camp, and people gathering to watch their arrival. Harrison felt every eye upon him as they entered the camp. He sat straight in his saddle, keeping his expression neutral and respectful. Children ran alongside his horse, curious and excited. Women watched from the doorways of lodges, and men stood in groups, their expressions ranging from curious to suspicious. Niall emerged from one of the larger lodges and came forward to greet them. He welcomed Harrison warmly, clasping his hand and speaking in Apache with a welcoming tone that needed no translation. Then he led Harrison to a central area where a large fire had been built and logs arranged for seating. The feast was unlike anything Harrison had experienced. There was venison and rabbit, corn and squash, wild berries preserved from the fall, and bread made from ground mesquite beans. The food was shared communally, passed around the circle of people gathered. Niall sat beside Harrison, with Winona on his other side to help translate when needed. As they ate, various people came forward to meet Harrison. He was introduced to elders and warriors, to Winona's uncle who had survived the storm, to children who stared at him with wide eyes. Everyone was curious about the white rancher who had saved Niall's daughter, who had shown kindness when he could have shown cruelty or indifference. After the meal, there was music and dancing. Harrison watched, fascinated by the rhythms and movements that were so different from any white social gathering he had attended. He found himself relaxing, enjoying the warmth of the fire and the community spirit that surrounded him. Then Niall stood and called for attention. He began to speak in Apache, his voice carrying across the gathered people. Winona leaned close to Harrison to translate quietly. "My father is telling everyone what happened," she whispered. "He is explaining how you found me in the snow, how you could have left me to die or hurt me, but instead, you saved my life and treated me with honor." She paused, listening to her father continue. "He says this proves that not all white men are enemies, that there can be understanding between our peoples if both sides choose honor over hatred." Harrison felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, but he understood the importance of what Niall was doing. In front of his entire camp, the Apache leader was declaring Harrison a friend, someone to be trusted. It was a gift of enormous value, and Harrison felt the weight of responsibility that came with it. When Niall finished speaking, he turned to Harrison and said in English, "You are welcome in our camp at any time, Harrison Yates. You are under our protection. Any who would harm you would answer to me and to all my warriors." The people gathered around the fire showed their approval, and Harrison stood to respond. "I am honored by your words and your hospitality," he said, knowing Winona would translate for those who did not speak English. "I hope this friendship between us can be a beginning, a small step toward peace and understanding. You and your people are welcome on my land. I give my word that you will always find respect and safety there." The evening continued with more music and storytelling. Harrison found himself drawn into conversations through Winona's translations, learning about Apache customs and beliefs, sharing stories about ranching and the land they all called home. He saw the humanity in these people, the same hopes and fears and dreams that motivated anyone trying to build a life and protect their family. As the night grew late and the fire burned low, Neal told Harrison that a lodge had been prepared for him. "You will stay the night as our guest," he said. "Tomorrow you may return to your ranch. My daughter should be strong enough now to make the journey home. She will return with you to gather her things, and then she will come back to us." Harrison felt a sharp pang at those words. Winona would be leaving. Of course she would. This was her home. These were her people. He had known all along that she would return to them. But somewhere in the past few days, he had stopped thinking about her departure. He had gotten used to her presence in his home, had come to depend on her company. The thought of his house empty again, of eating meals alone and having no one to talk to in the evening, filled him with unexpected sadness. He glanced at Winona and saw something in her expression that mirrored his own feelings. She looked away quickly, but not before he saw the conflict in her eyes. The lodge they had prepared for him was comfortable, with thick furs spread on the ground and a small fire burning in the center. Harrison lay awake for a long time, staring at the hide ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. A week ago, he had been a solitary rancher living his quiet, predictable life. Now he was lying in an Apache lodge, having been honored by their people and declared a friend. And he was falling in love with a woman from a completely different world, a woman who would be leaving his life as suddenly as she had entered it. He heard movement outside his lodge and recognized Winona's voice speaking quietly with someone. Then silence. Harrison closed his eyes and willed himself to sleep, but it was a long time coming. The next morning, Harrison woke to the sounds of the camp coming to life around him. He emerged from the lodge to find breakfast being prepared over the central fire. Winona brought him food, and he noticed she seemed quieter than usual, more withdrawn. They prepared to leave after breakfast, saying their farewells to Neal and the others who had gathered to see them off. Neal pulled Harrison aside for a moment. "My daughter has told me much about you," he said quietly. "She speaks of your kindness, your honor, your loneliness. I see how she looks at you, and I see how you look at her." He paused, his weathered face serious. "These are complicated times, Harrison Yates. A friendship between a white man and an Apache woman is one thing. Anything more would be difficult, perhaps impossible. I say this not to wound you, but so you understand the truth." Harrison met the older man's eyes. "I understand, sir. And I have nothing but respect for your daughter and your family. Whatever happens, I will honor that." Neal nodded slowly. "You are a good man. I wish the world were different, that such things did not matter, but we must live in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be." The ride back to Harrison's ranch was quiet. He and Winona rode side by side, but neither spoke much. The joy and ease that had developed between them over the past days seemed to have been replaced by an awareness of the inevitable separation that was coming. When they reached the ranch, Harrison helped Winona gather her few belongings, which had been cleaned and mended during her stay. Her moccasins were dry now, her buckskin dress repaired. She looked like she had when he first found her, except healthier and stronger. It was as if the past week was being erased, as if she had never been part of his daily life. They stood outside the house, the afternoon sun bright on the snow. The Apache guards who had accompanied them back waited at a respectful distance, ready to escort Winona home. "Thank you," Winona said, her voice formal, careful, "for everything. You saved my life. I will never forget your kindness." Harrison wanted to say so much more, but the words stuck in his throat. What could he say? That he had fallen in love with her in just a few days. That the thought of her leaving felt like losing part of himself. It was ridiculous, impossible, and utterly true. "You were never a burden," he finally managed. "I was glad to help, and I enjoyed your company." Winona looked up at him, and he saw tears shining in her eyes. "I enjoyed your company too," she said softly. "More than I should have." They stood there for a long moment, the unspoken feelings heavy between them. Then Winona took a step back. "I should go. It will be dark soon." "Winona, wait," Harrison said, unable to let her leave like this. "I know the situation is complicated. I know there are 100 reasons why this is impossible. But I need you to know that these past days have meant something to me. You have meant something to me." Winona closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, a tear tracked down her cheek. "You have meant something to me too, Harrison, but my father is right. The world is what it is. I am Apache. You are white. Our peoples are not at peace. For us to be together would cause problems for both sides, would put both of us in danger." "I know," Harrison said. "But does that mean we should not even try? Does that mean we should just accept things as they are and never hope for something better?" "Sometimes hope is not enough," Winona said, her voice breaking. "Sometimes we must accept what cannot be changed." She turned quickly and walked to her horse before Harrison could respond. She mounted in one fluid motion, and the Apache guards formed up around her. Harrison watched as they rode away, Winona sitting straight in her saddle, not looking back. When they disappeared from view, Harrison stood alone in the cold, feeling more isolated than he ever had in his life. The house behind him, which had felt warm and full of life just hours ago, now seemed empty and hollow. He had been alone before Winona arrived, but now that solitude felt unbearable. The next few weeks passed in a gray blur. Harrison threw himself into his work with renewed intensity, trying to exhaust himself enough that he would not lie awake at night thinking about Winona. He repaired fencing that did not need repairing, reorganized his barn, and started preparing for the spring calving season even though it was still months away. But no matter how hard he worked, he could not get her out of his mind. He would find himself setting out 2 cups for coffee before remembering he was alone. He would turn to share some observation about the weather or the cattle, only to realize there was no one there to listen. The house was filled with memories of her presence, and Harrison found himself treasuring them even as they caused him pain. A month after Winona left, Harrison rode into Palisade for supplies. The small town was busy with miners and ranchers stocking up before another storm system moved through. Harrison was loading sacks of flour onto his wagon when he overheard a conversation that made him pause. 2 rough-looking men were talking near the saloon, their voices carrying in the cold air. "I heard the army is planning to round up the Apache camps in the spring," one said. "Going to force them all onto the reservation whether they like it or not." "About time," the other replied. "Should have done it years ago. These savages got no business roaming free on land that could be used by decent people." Harrison felt anger rise in his chest. These men knew nothing about the Apache people, had never taken the time to see them as human beings with their own rights and culture. He thought about Neal and his people, about the hospitality they had shown him, about Winona and her intelligence and strength. The idea of them being forced from their lands, treated like criminals for simply trying to live their traditional way of life, filled him with rage. But what could he do? He was one man, a rancher with no political power or influence. The forces of history were moving in a direction he could not change. That feeling of helplessness was crushing. Harrison finished loading his supplies and headed back to his ranch, his mood darker than ever. As he approached his property, he was surprised to see a horse tied outside his house. It was an Apache pony, and sitting on his porch was a figure he recognized immediately. His heart leapt. Winona, she stood as he approached, and Harrison could see she had been crying. Her face was pale, her eyes red. Something was very wrong. He jumped down from his wagon and rushed to her. "What happened? Are you all right? Is your father—" "My father is well," Winona said, her voice shaking. "But our world is ending, Harrison. Soldiers came to our camp 3 days ago. They gave us orders. We must move to the reservation by the end of spring, or we will be forced there by the army. Any who resist will be considered hostile and will be killed." Harrison felt his worst fears confirmed. "I heard rumors in town today. I hope they were not true." Winona looked at him with desperation in her eyes. "I do not want to go to the reservation. I have heard stories of those places. People are kept like prisoners, given spoiled food, treated worse than animals. Children are taken away to boarding schools and forbidden to speak their own language. It is not life. It is slow death." "What will you do?" Harrison asked, though he already knew there were no good options. "My father and the elders are arguing. Some want to fight, but we cannot win against the army. Some want to flee to Mexico, but the journey would be hard and dangerous, and there is no guarantee we would be welcomed there. Most accept that we must go to the reservation and hope it will not be as bad as we fear." She looked up at Harrison, and he saw a wild hope in her eyes that scared him. "But I thought maybe there is another choice, for me at least." Harrison's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I could stay here," Winona said quietly. "With you, if you would have me. I know it would be difficult. I know people would talk, would disapprove. But I would rather face that than lose everything I value. I would rather be with you than be caged on a reservation." Harrison's heart was pounding so hard he could barely think. This was what he had wanted, what he had dreamed about since she left. But hearing it spoken aloud made the reality of the situation clear. "Winona, if you stay here, you would be giving up your family, your people, your entire world." "I know," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "But I would be choosing a different world, one where I could be free, where I could be happy. One where I could be with you. And your father, would he allow this?" Winona's face crumpled. "I have not told him. I could not. He would try to stop me, would say it is too dangerous, too impossible. But I had to come to you, had to know if you still felt the same way you did when I left." Harrison reached out and took her hands in his. They were cold and trembling. "I never stopped feeling that way. Not for a single day since you left. My house has been empty without you. My life has been empty without you." "Then let me stay," Winona pleaded. "Let me make a new life here with you. I will face whatever comes. I am not afraid of hard times or disapproval. I am only afraid of never seeing you again, of spending my life wondering what could have been." Harrison pulled her into his arms, and she pressed her face against his chest, her whole body shaking with sobs. He held her tightly, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the rightness of having her in his arms. But even as he held her, his mind was racing through the complications and dangers. "We need to talk to your father," he said finally. "I will not have you leave your family in secret with them thinking I stole you away. If we are going to do this, we need to do it with honor. I need to ask his permission properly." Winona pulled back and looked up at him. "He will say no." "Maybe," Harrison agreed, "but we have to try. Your father is a good man. He gave me his respect and his trust. I owe him the truth." After a long moment, Winona nodded. "You are right. We will go to him together. We will tell him the truth and ask for his blessing." She managed a small, shaky smile. Even if he says no, at least we will have tried." They left immediately, riding through the afternoon and into the evening to reach the Apache camp. The journey gave them time to talk, to make plans, to discuss all the challenges they would face. Harrison knew his neighbors would disapprove. Some might even become hostile. But he also knew that the friendship and protection offered by Niall and his people might provide some shield against the worst of it. And beyond the practical considerations, he knew with absolute certainty that he loved Winona and wanted to build a life with her, regardless of what anyone else thought. They reached the camp after dark. The guards recognized them and let them pass, though Harrison could see surprise and curiosity in their expressions. Winona led him to her father's lodge, and they waited outside while someone went to inform Niall of their arrival. The Apache leader emerged a few minutes later, his expression grave. He looked at his daughter, then at Harrison, and understanding dawned in his eyes. "Come inside," he said quietly. They entered the lodge, where a fire burned warmly in the center. Niall's wife, Winona's mother, was there as well. She was a handsome woman in her 50s, with intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She looked at her daughter with a mixture of love and sorrow. Niall sat and gestured for them to do the same. Harrison and Winona sat close together, and Harrison noticed that Niall's eyes tracked the small gesture. "I assume you have something to tell me," Niall said, his voice carefully neutral. Harrison took a deep breath and began. "Sir, I have come to ask for your daughter's hand in marriage. I know this is unexpected. I know there are many reasons why you might refuse. But I want you to understand that I love Winona and I believe she loves me. I want to offer her a home and a life where she can be free and safe." Niall was quiet for a long moment. Then he looked at his daughter. "This is truly what you want?" "Yes, father," Winona said, her voice steady. "I know the difficulties. I know what I would be giving up. But I also know what I would be gaining. Harrison is a good man. He has proven his honor, and I love him. I do not want to go to the reservation. I do not want to live in a cage. I want to choose my own path, even if it is a hard one." Niall turned to his wife and spoke to her in Apache. She responded, and they had a quiet but intense conversation. Harrison could not understand the words, but he could see the pain in both their faces. They were being asked to let their daughter go, to watch her step into a world that might reject her, might harm her. It was every parent's nightmare. Finally, Niall turned back to them. "My wife reminds me that we have already lost so much: our land, our freedom, our way of life. Perhaps it is better that our daughter chooses her own path, finds her own freedom, rather than being forced into something against her will." He looked at Harrison, his eyes fierce. "But I need to know that you understand what you are taking on. Winona will face prejudice and hatred from many of your people. You will be judged and possibly shunned for marrying an Apache woman. Your life will be harder because of this choice. Can you accept that?" "I can," Harrison said firmly. "I know it will not be easy, but nothing worth having ever is. I would rather face a hard life with Winona than an easy life without her." Niall studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You have my blessing, Harrison Yates. Take care of my daughter. Keep her safe. Give her the freedom and respect she deserves." His voice grew rough with emotion. "And if you ever hurt her, know that I will find you no matter where you run." Harrison understood the threat was real and accepted it. "If I ever hurt her, I will deserve whatever punishment you see fit." Winona's mother spoke then in halting English. "You come back, visit. With grandchildren someday, maybe. You still Apache, still my daughter. You understand?" Winona burst into tears and embraced her mother. The two women held each other tightly, speaking rapidly in Apache. Harrison looked away, giving them privacy in their grief and love. Niall stood and beckoned Harrison outside. They walked a short distance from the lodge, and the older man pulled out a pipe and tobacco. He offered it to Harrison first, a gesture of respect and sharing. They smoked in silence for a few minutes under the cold stars. "My people are being destroyed," Niall said finally. "Not all at once, not with bullets and blood, though there has been plenty of that too. We are being destroyed slowly, piece by piece. Our land taken, our children taken, our dignity taken. When I was young, I thought we could fight, could resist. But I have lived long enough to see that this fight cannot be won with weapons." He looked at Harrison. "Maybe the only way to survive is to adapt, to change, to find new ways of being in this new world. My daughter is doing that. She is choosing survival, choosing a future, even if it means leaving behind everything she has known. I am proud of her, even as my heart breaks. I will do everything in my power to make sure she never regrets this choice," Harrison said. "See that you do," Niall replied. Then, unexpectedly, he clapped Harrison on the shoulder. "Come, let us go back inside. We have a marriage to arrange." The next few days were a whirlwind. Niall insisted on a proper Apache marriage ceremony, and the whole camp became involved in the preparations. Harrison was touched by how the people, even those who had been skeptical of him, came together to honor Winona and wish her well. He understood that this was their way of accepting him, of giving their blessing to the union. The ceremony itself was beautiful and moving, with elements Harrison did not fully understand but respected deeply. There were prayers and songs, the exchanging of gifts, and finally, Niall's formal declaration that Harrison and Winona were now husband and wife. Harrison had never felt so humbled and honored in his life. After the ceremony, there was another feast, smaller than the first but no less joyful. Harrison found himself surrounded by people offering advice, teasing him, welcoming him into their community. Several of the warriors made it clear that they considered him a brother now, and that Winona's safety and happiness were matters of personal concern to them. Harrison appreciated the unsubtle warning and the genuine affection behind it. As the evening wore on, Winona's mother pulled her aside for a long conversation. Harrison saw them embrace again, saw the tears and the love. When Winona returned to his side, she was composed but subdued. "My mother gave me her blessing and her prayers," she told him quietly. "She said that in these changing times, we must make our own paths, create our own families and futures. She said she is grateful I found someone who will treasure me." "I will," Harrison promised, "every day for the rest of my life." They left the next morning with Winona's few possessions packed and many farewells said. Niall embraced his daughter one last time, whispering something in Apache that made her cry again. Then he turned to Harrison and gripped his hand firmly. "Remember your promises," he said. "And remember that you are always welcome here. You are family now." The ride back to the ranch was different from any of their previous journeys together. Now they were husband and wife, their futures bound together. Harrison found himself looking at Winona with wonder, hardly believing that this remarkable woman had chosen to be with him. When they arrived at the ranch, Harrison dismounted and then reached up to help Winona down. Instead of setting her on her feet, he swept her up in his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked. "It is a tradition," Harrison explained, carrying her toward the house. "The husband carries his bride over the threshold of their home. It is supposed to bring good luck." He carried her inside and finally set her down in front of the fire. Winona looked around the house that was now her home, and Harrison tried to see it through her eyes. It was simple and rough, built for function rather than beauty. But it was solid and warm, and it was theirs. "It is perfect," Winona said, as if reading his thoughts. She turned to him and smiled. "I am home." Harrison pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time, pouring all his love and relief and joy into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Welcome home, Mrs. Yates," Harrison whispered. "Mrs. Yates," Winona repeated, testing the unfamiliar name, then she smiled. "I like it. But I am also still Winona Etzity, daughter of the Apache. I am both now." "You are," Harrison agreed, "and I would not have it any other way." That first night in their home as husband and wife was tender and sweet. They lay together in the large bed, talking quietly about their hopes and dreams, about the life they would build together. Harrison felt a peace he had never known, a sense of completeness that came from finally finding the person he was meant to be with. The next few weeks brought adjustments as they learned to live together as a married couple. Winona took over much of the household management, bringing efficiency and order to Harrison's bachelor existence. She also surprised him with her skills. She could track and hunt nearly as well as he could read weather signs and animal behavior, and had a deep knowledge of the land that complemented his own ranching expertise. But there were also challenges. Harrison had to take Winona into Palisade to buy supplies, and the reaction was immediate and hostile. People stared openly, women whispered behind their hands, and several men made crude comments just loud enough to be heard. Harrison kept his temper with effort, knowing that responding to every provocation would only make things worse. The local shopkeeper, a man named Mr. Patterson who Harrison had always gotten along with, refused to serve them. "I do not sell to Indians," he said flatly. "And I do not sell to white men who have forgotten their place." Harrison felt rage boiling in his chest, but Winona laid a gentle hand on his arm. "Come," she said quietly, "we will go elsewhere." They ended up at the general store run by a Chinese immigrant named Mr. Chen, who had faced his own share of prejudice. He served them courteously and without comment, and Harrison made a mental note to do all his future business there. As they were loading their supplies onto the wagon, a woman approached them. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with kind eyes and a determined set to her jaw. "Excuse me," she said. "I am Mrs. Harriet Whitmore. I run the church in town." Harrison braced himself for another lecture or condemnation, but Mrs. Whitmore surprised him. "I wanted to say that I think what you have done is very brave," she said, addressing Winona directly. "And I wanted you to know that you are welcome at our church services if you wish to attend. I believe that God's love extends to all people, regardless of their birth, and anyone who seeks Him is welcome in His house." Winona looked surprised and touched. "Thank you," she said softly. "That is kind of you." Mrs. Whitmore nodded. "I know not everyone will feel the same way, and I am sure you will face difficulties. But I wanted you to know that there are those of us who believe in doing right by all people." She looked at Harrison. "Your father was a good man, Harrison. I knew him well. I think he would be proud of you for following your heart and showing kindness to someone in need." After she left, Winona turned to Harrison with tears in her eyes. "There are good people here," she said. "There are," Harrison agreed. "They are just harder to find sometimes." As winter turned to spring, a rhythm and routine developed. Harrison worked his ranch with renewed energy, preparing for the calving season. Winona proved invaluable, helping with the cattle and horses in ways that constantly surprised him. She had a gift with animals, a patience and understanding that made even the most stubborn creatures respond to her. They also worked together to improve the ranch house, with Winona adding touches that made it feel more like a home. She made curtains from fabric they bought on a trip to a larger town, planted herbs in a small garden near the house, and brought beauty and life to every corner of their home. In May, they received word that the Apache camps, including Neal's band, had been moved to the reservation. Harrison could see the pain in Winona's face at the news, and he held her as she cried for her people and their lost freedom. They made plans to visit when possible, to bring supplies and support to Niall and his family. It was during one of these difficult days that Winona came to Harrison with news that changed everything. They were sitting on the porch in the evening, watching the sun set over the mountains, when she took his hand and placed it on her stomach. "We are going to have a baby," she said quietly. "In the fall, I think." Harrison felt the world stop for a moment. Then joy, pure and overwhelming, flooded through him. "Are you sure?" Winona smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. "I am sure. I have known for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before I told you." Harrison pulled her into his arms, his mind reeling with the implications. A child. They were going to have a child. Their family was growing, their life together becoming more real and permanent with each passing day. "Are you happy?" Winona asked, and he heard a note of uncertainty in her voice. "Happy?" Harrison pulled back to look at her, cupping her face in his hands. "Winona, I am more than happy, I am blessed. You have given me everything I never knew I needed. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. I love you more than I can ever put into words." Tears streamed down Winona's face, but she was smiling. "I love you too. So much. I was afraid at first, afraid of what having a child would mean, of bringing a baby into a world that might reject them because of who we are. But then I realized that we are creating our own world, our own family, and we will teach our children to be strong and proud of both sides of their heritage." The pregnancy progressed well through the summer months. Harrison became fiercely protective, insisting that Winona rest more and do less of the heavy ranch work. She tolerated his fussing with good-humored patience, though she also continued to help with tasks she felt capable of doing. They made one trip to visit Niall at the reservation, and it was heartbreaking. The conditions were worse than they had feared. The people were crowded together in inadequate housing, given barely enough food to survive on, and treated with suspicion and contempt by the government agents who ran the place. But seeing Niall's face light up when they told him about the coming grandchild made the difficult journey worthwhile. "This is hope," Niall said, placing his hand on Winona's growing belly. "This child will carry our blood into the future, will remember where they came from. Teach them, daughter. Teach them the stories, the language, the ways of our people. Do not let them forget." "I will not," Winona promised. "And we will come back as often as we can. You will know your grandchild." They brought supplies with them when they left, everything they could spare and some they probably could not, and Niall distributed it among his people. Harrison saw the gratitude in their faces and felt a burning anger at the injustice of it all. These proud, capable people reduced to dependence on charity and government handouts. It was wrong on every level. On the ride home, Winona was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "I made the right choice leaving when I did. I could not have survived there, watching my people fade away. At least this way I can remember them as they were, strong and free, and I can pass that memory to our children." Harrison reached over and squeezed her hand. "We will go back as often as you want, and when our children are old enough, we will bring them so they can know their heritage, know their grandfather and the Apache people." As autumn approached, Harrison made preparations for the birth. He rode to Palisade and asked Mrs. Whitmore if she knew of a midwife who would be willing to help. The churchwoman thought for a moment, then suggested a woman named Sarah Chen, the wife of the shopkeeper who had served them before. Mrs. Chen had been a midwife in China before immigrating and had helped deliver many babies in their new country. When Harrison approached the Chens with his request, they agreed immediately. "We understand what it is like to be outsiders," Mr. Chen said. "We help each other." In late October, when the aspen trees were bright gold against the mountains and the first frost had touched the ground, Winona went into labor. Harrison rode frantically to town to fetch Mrs. Chen, then paced anxiously outside their bedroom while the midwife and Winona worked together. The hours seemed to stretch forever, filled with sounds that made Harrison's heart clench with worry. Finally, as the sun was setting, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, strong and healthy. Mrs. Chen opened the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy. Your wife did very well. You may come in now." Harrison entered the room on shaking legs. Winona lay in the bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. She looked up at Harrison with such love and joy that he felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Harrison approached and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had Winona's dark hair and delicate features, but Harrison could see something of himself in the shape of the nose and chin. Their son, their child, the perfect blend of both of them. "He is beautiful," Harrison whispered, reaching out to gently touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately closed around his father's finger, gripping with surprising strength. "What should we name him?" Winona asked. They had discussed names many times during the pregnancy, wanting something that honored both their cultures. "I was thinking," Harrison said carefully, "what if we named him Henry for his first name, after my father, but gave him an Apache name as well?" Winona smiled. "I would like that. My father suggested a name when we visited, Hania. It means spirit warrior, Henry Hania Yates." "Henry Hania Yates," Harrison repeated. "It is perfect." Mrs. Chen stayed with them for a few days, teaching Harrison how to care for the baby and making sure Winona recovered well from the birth. Before she left, she pulled Harrison aside. "You have a beautiful family," she said. "I hope you know how lucky you are. Not many people find what you and your wife have found." "I do know," Harrison assured her. "Every single day I know." The first months with baby Henry were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Harrison had never been around babies much and had to learn everything from how to change a diaper to how to soothe a crying infant in the middle of the night. But he threw himself into fatherhood with the same determination he brought to everything else. Winona was a natural mother, patient and loving, but also practical. She made a cradle board in the traditional Apache style and would carry Henry on her back while she worked around the house and yard. She sang to him in Apache, teaching him the songs of her people from his earliest days. As winter set in again, Harrison reflected on how much his life had changed in just over a year. 12 months ago, he had been alone, content in his solitude but not truly happy. Now his house was filled with the sounds of life, Winona singing as she cooked, Henry fussing to be fed, the small domestic noises that meant family and love and belonging. They faced challenges, of course. Some of their neighbors remained hostile, and there were occasional incidents of harassment. Someone shot one of Harrison's cattle and left it near the road with insulting words carved into a tree nearby. Harrison reported it to the local sheriff, who did nothing. Another time, someone threw a rock through their window with a note telling them to leave town. But there were also unexpected allies. Mrs. Whitmore continued to support them, as did the Chen family. A few other ranchers, those who had worked with Harrison over the years and respected his skill and work ethic, made it clear that they would not tolerate violence against him or his family. It was not universal acceptance, but it was enough to keep them safe. In the spring, when Henry was 6 months old, they made another trip to the reservation to visit Neal. The Apache leader was overjoyed to meet his grandson, holding the baby with practiced ease and speaking to him in Apache. Winona translated his words for Harrison. He says that Henry has strong eyes, that he will grow up to be a great man. He says he sees the future of our people in this child, the blending of two worlds that might somehow survive when the old ways cannot. Winona's voice caught with emotion. He says he is proud of me, of us, of the family we have created. Niall handed Henry back to Winona, then turned to Harrison. "Thank you," he said in English, "for loving my daughter, for giving her freedom and safety, for giving me this grandson. You have kept every promise you made." "I will always keep them," Harrison replied. "You have my word." That visit strengthened Harrison's resolve to do more. He began quietly helping other Apache families when he could, sometimes buying supplies and having them delivered to the reservation, sometimes using his connections with other ranchers to find work for young Apache men who wanted to leave the reservation temporarily. It was small compared to the scale of the problem, but it was what he could do. The years passed in a blur of work and family life. Henry grew from a baby into a curious toddler, then an energetic young boy. He learned to ride before he could write his name, was equally comfortable speaking English and Apache, and absorbed everything his parents could teach him about ranching, tracking, and living off the land. When Henry was 3, Winona became pregnant again. This time, their daughter was born in the summer, an easier birth than the first. They named her Mary after Harrison's mother with the Apache name Ayana, which meant eternal blossom. Mary had her father's lighter coloring but her mother's features, and from the beginning, she had a fierce determination that made both parents laugh. Harrison's ranch prospered, growing slowly but steadily. Word got around that he was fair and honest in his dealings, and gradually, more people were willing to do business with him despite his unconventional family. It helped that he was known as one of the best cattlemen in the region, that his stock was healthy and well managed, and that he always paid his debts on time. Mrs. Whitmore remained a steadfast friend, and she took particular delight in the children. She taught Henry his letters and numbers, and later Mary as well, insisting that they needed proper education even though they could not attend the town school. Harrison was grateful for her kindness and her courage in standing by them when it would have been easier to look the other way. One autumn day, when Henry was 7 and Mary 4, a rider approached the ranch. Harrison tensed when he saw it was one of the Apache warriors he recognized from his visits to the reservation. The man's face was grave as he dismounted. Winona came out of the house, and Harrison saw her face go pale as the warrior spoke to her in Apache. She responded urgently, and the conversation went back and forth for several minutes. Finally, the warrior mounted his horse and rode away. "What is it?" Harrison asked, though he feared he already knew. "My father," Winona said, her voice breaking. "He is dying. We need to go to him quickly if I am to say goodbye." They left within the hour, bringing both children since there was no one to leave them with. The ride to the reservation seemed to take forever, even though they pushed their horses as fast as they dared with the children. They arrived to find Niall in his small cabin, lying on a cot with several family members gathered around. The old warrior had aged significantly since Harrison had last seen him. He was thin and gray, his breathing labored. But when he saw Winona enter with the children, his eyes lit up with joy. He gestured for them to come close. Winona knelt beside her father's bed, taking his hand. They spoke in Apache for a long time, and Harrison saw tears streaming down both their faces. Henry and Mary stood quietly, understanding that something important and sad was happening. Finally, Niall gestured for Harrison to come closer as well. The dying man spoke in halting English, his voice weak but clear. You have been good to my daughter, better than I hoped. You have given her a life of dignity and love." He paused to catch his breath. "These children are the future. They carry our blood, our stories. Teach them to be proud. Teach them to remember." "I will," Harrison promised, his throat tight with grief. "They will know who they are and where they come from, I swear it." Neil smiled weakly. "Good, that is all any father can ask." He looked at his grandchildren one more time, then closed his eyes. "I can rest now." He died peacefully an hour later with his family around him. Winona was devastated, and Harrison held her as she wept. They stayed for the funeral ceremonies, which lasted 3 days. Harrison made sure to participate where he was allowed, honoring the man who had given him not only a wife, but also acceptance and friendship. On the ride home, with the children asleep in the wagon, Winona leaned against Harrison's shoulder. "He lived to see his grandchildren," she said quietly. "He knew our family was strong and surviving. That gave him peace at the end." "He was a great man," Harrison said. "I am honored to have known him." "He thought highly of you too," Winona replied. "He told me once that you were the son he never had, that you had brought hope back to his heart when he thought all was lost." She looked up at Harrison with tears still on her cheeks. "He was right to approve our marriage. You have given me a good life, Harrison, a happy life. I want you to know that." "You have given me the same," Harrison said, kissing the top of her head. "I cannot imagine my life without you and our children. You are everything to me." The years continued to pass. Henry grew into a capable young man, strong and skilled in all aspects of ranching and equally comfortable in both the white and Apache worlds. He became Harrison's right hand on the ranch, and together they expanded their operation, buying more land and increasing their herd. Mary grew into a spirited young woman with her mother's beauty and her father's business sense. She handled much of the ranch's bookkeeping and correspondence, and she had a gift for negotiation that served them well when dealing with buyers and suppliers. When Henry turned 22, he fell in love with a girl from town, the granddaughter of Mrs. Whitmore. The old churchwoman, now in her 80s, was delighted by the match. The wedding was a blending of traditions, with both a church ceremony and Apache elements, a reflection of Henry's dual heritage. Mary married a few years later, choosing a young rancher from a neighboring property who had proven himself to be fair-minded and hardworking. Harrison approved of the match, seeing in the young man someone who would treat his daughter with the respect she deserved. As Harrison and Winona grew older, they watched their family expand with grandchildren. Henry and his wife had 3 children, while Mary and her husband had 4. The ranch house that had once been so quiet was now regularly filled with the sounds of children playing and families gathering. Harrison retired gradually from the day-to-day running of the ranch, turning over more responsibility to Henry while still offering advice and guidance. He spent his days enjoying Winona's company, playing with his grandchildren, and reflecting on the remarkable life they had built together. One evening, sitting on their porch and watching the sunset as they had done countless times before, Winona took Harrison's hand. They were both in their 60s now, their hair gray and their faces lined, but the love between them had only deepened with time. "You remember the day you found me in the snow?" Winona asked. "Of course," Harrison replied. "It was the most important day of my life, though I did not know it at the time." Winona smiled. "I was so afraid that morning when I woke up and saw you. I thought you might hurt me or turn me away, but you showed me kindness instead. You changed the course of my entire life." "And you changed mine," Harrison said. "I was just existing before you came, not really living. You taught me what it meant to be truly alive, to love and be loved, to build something meaningful." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard, watched over by Henry and Mary. The ranch stretched out before them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to years of hard work and dedication. "We did well," Winona said softly. "Despite everything against us, we built a good life, a good family." "We did more than that," Harrison replied. "We proved that love and respect can bridge any divide, that two people from different worlds can create something beautiful together." He squeezed her hand gently. "You are still the best thing that ever happened to me, Winona, even after all these years." "And you to me," she said, leaning her head on his shoulder as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Harrison reflected on their journey as he watched the sun dip below the horizon. They had faced prejudice and danger, had lost and grieved, had struggled and persevered. But they had also loved deeply, raised good children, and created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their grandchildren carried both Apache and white blood, honored both traditions, and moved freely in both worlds. They were proof that understanding and acceptance were possible, that the barriers between people were not as insurmountable as they seemed. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harrison felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. He had been given a gift that day in the snow when he found Winona. He had been given the chance to love and be loved, to build a family and a life that mattered. Not everyone got such chances, and he had never taken it for granted. Inside the house, he could hear Mary calling the children in for dinner, hear the sounds of family and warmth and belonging. His home, once so empty and quiet, was now full of life and laughter. It was everything he had never known he wanted, everything he had never dared to dream. "Come on," Winona said, standing up and offering her hand. "Mary has made enough food for an army, and you know how she gets if we are late to the table." Harrison took her hand and stood, pulling her close for a quick kiss. Even after all these years, her presence still made his heart skip a beat. They walked inside together, hand in hand, surrounded by the family they had built and the love they had nurtured through decades of life together. The story that had begun with a man finding a freezing girl in the snow had become a legacy of love, courage, and hope. It was a reminder that the choices we make in moments of crisis can change not just our own lives, but the lives of generations to come. Harrison and Winona had chosen love over fear, acceptance over prejudice, and hope over despair. And in doing so, they had created something rare and precious, a family, and a life built on mutual respect, deep love, and the willingness to see the humanity in someone different from themselves. As the evening progressed with dinner and stories, and the comfortable chaos of a large family gathering, Harrison looked around the table at the faces he loved. Henry and his wife and their children, Mary and her husband and theirs, and at the center of it all, Winona, still beautiful to him, still the woman who had changed his world. He caught her eye across the table, and she smiled at him, that same smile that had first appeared all those years ago when she was recovering in his house, learning to trust him. It was a smile that said more than words ever could, that she was happy, that she had no regrets, that she would choose this life and this love again if given the chance. Harrison smiled back, and in that moment, everything was perfect. They had built something lasting, something that would continue long after they were gone. Their children would pass down the stories, would teach their own children about the rancher who saved an Apache girl from the snow and the woman who chose love over safety. It was a legacy worth leaving, a life worth living. The fire crackled in the hearth, the family talked and laughed around the table, and outside the Colorado night was clear and cold, the stars bright overhead. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities. But for now, in this moment, Harrison Yates was exactly where he was meant to be, surrounded by the family he loved and the woman who had made it all possible. As the evening drew to a close, and the families prepared to head to their own homes nearby, there were hugs and kisses, promises to visit soon, and the comfortable rituals of a close-knit family saying goodnight. Harrison and Winona stood in the doorway, waving as their children and grandchildren departed, their voices and laughter fading into the night. When everyone had gone and the house was quiet again, Harrison banked the fire while Winona cleaned up the last of the dishes. Then they prepared for bed, moving through the familiar routines of a couple who had spent decades together. As they lay in bed, in the darkness with only the dying glow of the fire providing faint light, Winona nestled close to Harrison, her head on his chest. "Tell me again about that first day," she said, as she had asked him to do many times over the years. And Harrison did, describing how he had seen a dark shape in the snow, how he had realized it was a person, how he had made the choice to help without hesitation. He told her about carrying her back to his house, about his worry that she might not survive, about his relief when she opened her eyes. It was a story they never tired of, the story of how their life together had begun. "And I woke up and saw a stranger standing over me," Winona continued, picking up her part of the tale. "I was so afraid, but then you smiled and something in me knew I was safe. I knew you were a good man. I was terrified when I woke up and saw 200 warriors surrounding my house," Harrison added with a chuckle. "I thought my life was over. But my father saw the truth," Winona said. "He saw that you had shown me honor and kindness, and everything changed from that moment." They talked quietly for a while longer, reminiscing about their years together, about the challenges they had overcome and the joys they had shared. Eventually, Winona's breathing deepened and evened out as she drifted off to sleep, still tucked close to Harrison's side. Harrison lay awake a little longer, thinking about the path his life had taken. If someone had told him that cold morning when he rode out to check his cattle that he would find his future wife freezing in the snow, he would have thought they were crazy. If they had told him that her people would surround his house in force, but that it would lead to friendship and family rather than violence, he would have been even more skeptical. Life was strange and unpredictable, full of moments that could change everything if you made the right choice. Harrison had made the right choice, and he had been blessed because of it. He had found love in the most unlikely place, had built a family that bridged two worlds, and had lived a life rich in meaning and purpose. As sleep finally claimed him, Harrison's last conscious thought was a prayer of gratitude for the woman sleeping beside him, for the family they had created, for the life they had lived together. He had been given more than he deserved and more than he had ever hoped for, and he was thankful for every moment of it. The years continued to unfold, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows, challenges and triumphs. Harrison and Winona grew older together, their love maturing into something even deeper and more precious. They celebrated as their grandchildren grew up and started families of their own, adding great-grandchildren to their legacy. The ranch continued to prosper under Henry's capable management, and the Yates name became respected throughout the territory, known for fair dealing and quality stock. When Harrison was 73, his health began to fail. A lifetime of hard work and Colorado winters had taken their toll on his body. Winona nursed him tenderly, rarely leaving his side. On a spring morning when the aspens were just beginning to bud, Harrison Yates passed away peacefully in his sleep, his hand held in Winona's, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. Winona mourned deeply, but she also felt gratitude that they had been given so many years together, that he had lived to see their family flourish, and their love validated by time and perseverance. She lived for another 8 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, passing down Apache traditions and stories, making sure that her people's heritage would not be lost in her descendants. When Winona finally passed away, at the age of 81, she was buried beside Harrison on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Their children made sure that the graves honored both their heritages, with Apache symbols alongside Christian ones, a testament to the blending of cultures that had defined their lives. The ranch continued for generations, always staying in the family, always remembering the story of how it had all begun with a man who chose compassion over indifference, who saw a fellow human being in need and acted to help. The story of Harrison and Winona became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. It was a reminder that love could overcome prejudice, that understanding could bridge cultural divides, and that courage came in many forms: the courage to save a stranger, the courage to fall in love across boundaries, the courage to build a life together despite opposition and hardship. Their descendants prospered, carrying both Yates and Apache blood, proud of both sides of their heritage. Many became leaders in their communities, known for fairness and integrity. They worked to improve conditions on the reservations, to preserve Apache culture and history, and to build bridges between native and white communities. In doing so, they honored the legacy of their ancestors, who had shown that two worlds could come together in love and respect. More than a century later, the Yates Ranch still stood, though much had changed. The descendants of Harrison and Winona had spread across the country, successful in various fields: medicine, law, business, education, politics. But they still gathered at the ranch for reunions, still told the story of the rancher who found an Apache girl freezing in the snow, and the 200 braves who surrounded his home the next morning. It was their origin story, the founding myth of their family, and it never lost its power to move and inspire. The graves of Harrison and Winona remained on the hillside, carefully tended by each generation. People still came to visit them, to stand in silence and think about the courage and love that had started it all. The story had become more than just family history. It had become a lesson about the power of choosing compassion, about seeing beyond surface differences to the shared humanity underneath. And on quiet mornings when mist hung in the valleys and the mountains loomed eternal in the distance, if you stood very still near those graves, you might almost sense their presence: still the rancher and his Apache wife, their hands eternally clasped, their love transcending death just as it had transcended the barriers of their world. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy that would endure. What more could anyone ask from a life? The story of Harrison Yates and Winona stood as proof that one moment of kindness, one choice made in the face of adversity, could echo through generations. It reminded people that the divisions between us are often false, created by fear and misunderstanding rather than any real incompatibility. And it offered hope that love, real and true love, could overcome anything if two people had the courage to reach for it and the strength to hold on through whatever storms might come. In a time when the West was wild and often violent, when cultures clashed and prejudice ran deep, Harrison and Winona had carved out a space for love and acceptance. They had created a family that honored both their heritages, and they had lived lives of meaning and purpose. Their story would not be forgotten because it mattered, because it showed what was possible when people chose love over fear and hope over hate. And so the story ended, not with conflict or tragedy, but with love triumphant, with a family strong and growing, with a legacy that would continue. Harrison and Winona's love story was complete, their lives fulfilled, their happiness earned through courage and perseverance. They had found each other against all odds, had built a life together that defied expectations, and had proved that love, in the end, was the strongest force of all. The ranch endured. The family flourished. The love remained, eternal as the mountains, deep as the valleys, strong as the wind that swept across the Colorado plains. And every spring, when the snow melted and new life returned to the land, it was as if Harrison and Winona's love was renewed as well, blooming fresh and bright with each new generation that carried their blood and honored their memory. This was their legacy. This was their gift. And it would never be forgotten.